Welcome back. In an interview, Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander, General Mohammad Ali Jafari, said that his country won't hesitate to strike back if attacked by Israel. Jafari stated that the entire region will be threatened, saying that Iran won't stand alone against any Israeli or US military strike, a threat that chaos will sweep the region, turning it into a ball of fire. Jafari didn't rule out the use of oil as a weapon. In the event of any attack on Iran, he said that Iran will shrink the global oil supply by almost a quarter, and the situation will make the consequences of a military strike dire and unbearable. Let's talk about these and other issues with our guest once again from Tehran, Professor Syed Mohammad Marandi, in Tel Aviv, Dr. Ranan Gissin, and in Washington, D.C., Dr. Hilary Mann-Levitt. Dr. Gissin, you waited very patiently for some time in the first part of the programme, so I'd like to come to you first of all. Iran's foreign minister has said that he doesn't think Israel could launch an attack because it's still suffering from the consequences of the 2006 war with Lebanon. How prepared for any kind of action do you think your country is?
Well, we're prepared for any option. We prefer the sanctions. We prefer other means in order to convince the Iranian regime and leaders that they should stop their program. Now, by the way, I want to remind you and remind the Dr. Levin from Washington that in the 50s, the United States had the largest CIA station in Tehran. That was, you know, after the Shah of Iran reigned there. And the regime instability was not considered a pejorative term. In other words, there are cheaper ways, and I'd say more effective ways, to convince the Iranian regime than a military attack. You know, they're asking for it. You know, attack us so that we can convince our people and the rest of the Arab world that we are the victims. And I think there is another way, not just sanctions from outside, but sanctions from inside Iran, which can change the perception of these leaders. The problem is not the nuclear program. The problem is the ideology and the leader who espouse an ideology which condones the use of nuclear weapons.
Professor Marandi, I see a slight grin on your face. It's not outright laughter, but I mean, I think you don't believe that Dr. Gissin is hitting the nail on the head there. What's your feeling?
Well, obviously, no leader in Iran has ever condoned the use of nuclear weapons, and we all know that it is the Zionist regime that actually has nuclear weapons, so it's rather odd to make such a statement. Iran is a country that is strong enough to defend itself, and at the moment, as the oil markets are as they are, Iran is in a very strong position. At the same time, there has never been any evidence whatsoever to show that Iran's nuclear program has been anything but peaceful, but it is the hostility of the Zionist regime towards Iran that really drives its foreign policy.
Well, can I just say something? Let me interject here. The National Intelligence Estimate, which was produced at the end of last year, said it believed that Iran had stopped a weapons program in 2003, which means that it did have one at one point.
Well, yes, there are two problems here. One is that until this National Intelligence Estimate came out, they were saying that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. Perhaps a year from now, a new administration would say that Iran never did have a nuclear weapons program. All we can do is just believe what Washington says, and we know how honest this administration and this regime in Washington has been over Iraq, as well as other issues throughout the globe. The United States government is not known for its honesty. The reality is the IAEA has never found evidence to show that Iran's nuclear program has been anything but peaceful, and therefore they must accept that. The problem is that the UN Security Council and even the board of the IAEA, neither of them are democratic bodies. The Americans and their allies are highly influential, and they're able to push countries around to get what they want. At the same time, what your other guest said about pressuring Iran from the inside, I don't know if that implies supporting terrorist organizations, but sadly that is what the United States and the EU are doing. They are now supporting terrorist organizations that kill Iranians and that have killed Iraqis in the past. And this, I think, is a sad day for the EU and the United States.
Dr. Leverett, I'd like to bring you in at this point and talk about specific issues of now rather than those broader concepts. A report in one of the most influential US magazines by a well-respected reporter who is often rubbished by the White House, but it says that the US spent $400 million last year stepping up its covert operations against Iran. In other words, trying to find out what was going on, perhaps paying to get information about insecurity within the regime. Do you think that that's quite likely?
Well, I can't testify to the accuracy of what was put into that report, though I do think that a lot of that information is information that we hear in Washington at this point, unfortunately, pretty routinely. I think the danger of it is that whether or not it's true, the perception, as we see from my colleague in Tehran today, is that the perception in Tehran will be to take it as true. And unfortunately, we've seen this bad movie before. In 1994, during the Clinton administration, the Congress here in the United States similarly allocated a pot of money for internal, quote-unquote, democratization projects to try to push an insurgency or a change of government from within Iran. 2 years later, we had the Khobar attacks in Saudi Arabia. The idea that, whether it's real or not, that if the U.S. is going to advocate these internal regime change programs under the guise of democracy, the idea that the Iranians are not going to react is fantasy. The fact is the Iranians will react, and they have the ability to target the U.S., not only 150,000 of our troops in and around Iraq, but in the Gulf. We have a significant naval presence in Afghanistan and worldwide. The idea that we should take the chance to ignite another terrorist campaign of terror and instability there, to me, is just reckless.
Dr. Gissin, former advisor to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, you were shaking your head just then?
Yeah, it's really ludicrous, as if we are dealing with an innocent regional power, Iran, which has been persecuted by the rest of the world. Iran, according to U.S. intelligence reports, supports over 40 terrorist organizations around the world. Shiite organization, Sunni organization. It meddles in the affair of Saudi Arabia, of the Gulf Emirates, in Baghdad, in Iraq, they support terrorist organization. So what is this thing about, oh, let's not shake the boat because they'll cause instability in the region? Iran is the cause for instability. It will cause more instability if it has nuclear weapons. And you don't need, by the way, a nuclear program. You don't need a nuclear program in order to enrich uranium, okay? It takes about 6 months to assemble a nuclear bomb, I can tell you. 6 months to assemble a nuclear bomb. The critical issue is the threshold. After you enrich uranium over 95%, then you have a real problem on your hand. Because I want
to go back to Professor Morandi here and talk about what may well happen next. There seems to be some kind of momentum at the moment for imposing extra sanctions on Iran. How is Iran going to prevent this from happening?
Well, I think that Iran has the capability to change the situation in the region. Its navy could start, if Iran's assets abroad are confiscated, then Iran may have to react perhaps in the Persian Gulf region, in the wider region, and stop ships and do stops and searches. There are many ways in which Iran can retaliate, but I just do want to point out the real problem. You're saying it would actually
aggressively defy sanctions?
I think that Iran will definitely play a much tougher game from here on. But from the Iranian perspective, the problem really is Israel. Iranians see Israel as an apartheid state, a racist state. And as long as racism prevails in the Palestinian territories, and as long as the Palestinian people are oppressed by an apartheid state in that region, the region will not become calm. The neighbors of Palestine will not sit down, and the people will not be quiet about what is going on.
Okay,
so I don't think the problem really lies in Tehran.
I'm sure you don't, and I'm sure Dr. Gissin doesn't believe the problem lies in Israel. And I'm sure Dr. Leverett doesn't believe the problem lies in Washington, D.C. I'm sorry I couldn't have given you two the last word, but somebody had to have it. It was Professor Morandi in this case. I do appreciate the contribution that each one of you has made. I do wish the discussion could have been a little bit longer. Saeed Morandi, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Raanan Gissin and Dr. Hilary Mann Leverett. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story, and thank you for watching our programme. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us, insidestory@aljazeera.net, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Till next time, bye-bye.